What's up everybody, and welcome back in for another episode of SwissCheeseBeats. My name is Daniel. This is episode 13. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to get away from the drums. We're actually going to continue on with the Region 29 middle school etudes, except today's going to be the 2-mallet Marimba Etude. Auditions for the students are happening in about another month or so, and so I want to go ahead and get this material out for them to help them prepare as best as they can for their upcoming audition. So we could go down the rabbit hole of talking about different approaches to marimba. However, I really don't want to go too deep into that content for this video. There are a couple of things that I will suggest when it comes to marimba playing. However, we won't be getting into the nitty-gritty of marimba approach and technique. Now, with that being said, if you have a question about something that I do not cover specifically about marimba technique, please feel free to leave that down below in the comment section. I'll be sure to get you your answer as soon as I can to make sure that you're on your way with a solid fundamental approach. So as far as technique goes, there are a couple of things that you want to make sure you're doing. The biggest difference here between mallet approach and snare drum approach is that with keyboard instruments, you're dealing with instruments that do not create any type of rebound the way that drums do. Therefore, you're going to create what I call a synthetic rebound, meaning that you are going to be completely responsible for bringing the mallet back up after striking a key. In order to do so efficiently and consistently, you have to move the fulcrum then to the back of the hand versus say snare drum where the fulcrum is in the front of the hand. By moving the fulcrum to the back of the hand, you are then moving the pivot point back to your wrists, which will allow you to have total control over the mallet. The type of stroke we use when playing the keyboard instrument is called a piston stroke. The mallet in this case is going to start in the high position or the up position, it's going to strike the bar, and then it's going to immediately return up to the high position where it started. The last thing I'm going to discuss in this video about marimba approach is where to strike the bars on the instrument. This is something that has been debated by many for a long time. The approach that I take on the naturals and the accidentals when possible is I always aim for the off center of the bar. Meaning if you take a look at a keyboard note, you have the dead center of the note. What I usually do is strike either right above dead center or right below dead center, depending on what kind of passage I'm playing and how my mallets need to move. If I have the time and the tempo I'm playing allows me to do so, I will also aim for the off center of the bar, usually the lower off center of the accidentals. If the tempo is quick or the rhythms I'm playing are very fast, what I'll then do is move where I strike the accidentals down to the edge of the bar right above the naturals. This is not the only way to approach this instrument. Again, this is just my opinion, certainly not written in stone by any means. Now, getting into the etude, a couple of things you need to be aware of is that one, the etude is written in a 6/8 time signature. Now, just to break down quickly how time signatures work, the bottom note represents what kind of note gets the beat. The top number is going to represent how many beats per measure. So in this case, the 8 on the bottom represents an eighth note, and the top number means for every measure, you will have 6 eighth notes. You can count the beats in a 6/8 measure as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In fact, that's how I'm going to recommend you count the rhythms in this particular situation, because the performance tempo is moderately slow, anywhere between 92 and 100 beats per minute. So in a measure of 6/8, you could have 3 quarter notes, 6 eighth notes, or even 12 16th notes. How you would count this, the quarter notes should be counted as 1, 3, and 5. The eighth notes would be counted as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the 16th notes would be counted as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and. Yes, there are other ways to count 6/8. However, just for simplicity, let's go ahead and stick to this counting system. One last thing before getting into specific rhythms, dotted notes. To be as simple as possible, a dot adds half of the value of the note that it is attached to. In this particular etude, you're going to see dotted quarter notes. So a quarter note is worth 1. If you put a dot on it, it's going to be worth 1.5. But since we're in 6/8, you want to be thinking about how many eighth notes fit into a quarter note. Well, 2 eighth notes fit into a quarter note. However, by adding a dot, that quarter note now becomes a dotted quarter note worth 1.5 counts, which would be worth 3 eighth notes. So if you look at measure 1 of the piece, the rhythm you have in this measure are 3 eighth notes, followed by a dotted eighth note, followed by 3 16th notes. The first 3 eighth notes are going to be pretty straightforward. They fall right on the beat, so they'll take up counts 1, 2, and 3. However, the dotted eighth note is going to take up 4 as well as half of beat 5. That leaves 3/16 notes, and those 3/16 notes would take the syllables and, 6, and. As I said before, the tempo of the piece is moderately slow, 92 to 100 beats a minute, and that's eighth note equal 92 to 100. So I'm going to go ahead and set a metronome at 92. This first measure is going to be counted like so. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, and 1. In measure 2, on count 4, you're going to see your first 2-note roll, meaning you're going to play a roll between 2 separate notes on the instrument. With a roll, and for all rolls in this piece, all you're trying to do is sustain a note for whatever value it's written as in the rhythm. In measure 7, you're going to see a new rhythm, which is going to be a dotted eighth note, which is rolled, followed by a single 16th note, which is then followed by a single eighth note. Once again, dotted eighth notes are going to be worth 3/16 notes, meaning you're going to sustain that roll, and then on the and of 5, you're going to play the single 16th note going into the eighth note on the downbeat of 6. So measure 7 would be counted like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, 1. Also in measure 7, you'll notice a slur mark starting on beat 4 going all the way through beat 6. What this means is that you're going to want to make sure to sustain that roll and nearly connect it to the and of 5, which is the single 16th note you're going to be playing. Try to minimize the space between the roll and the note that follows whenever notated by a slur mark such as this. So don't think of having to play extremely fast to play a roll. Just play at whatever speed you're going to be comfortable with that's going to allow you to play a consistent sustained note as best as possible. So what I've done is I've broken up the piece into 4 different sections, beginning to A to B, B to C, and C to the end. We're gonna cover each section individually, that way we can make sure and break down anything that comes off as a little bit tricky. The first couple of things from beginning to A we've already covered. Make sure that you do everything you can to read around the notes, meaning you're reading all the articulations, all of the dynamics in the piece. So here's gonna be the beginning to letter A. Looking at A to B, the first thing to notice is that in the first measure of letter A on beat 6, the 2-note roll is tied to beat 1 of measure 10, meaning you're going to sustain that roll on beat 6 over the bar line to release on count 1 of measure 10. You have the same exact rhythm written in measure 11, so make sure once again that you sustain beat 6 over the bar line to beat 1 of measure 12. In measure 10, you're going to see your first grace note before an actual note. In this case, it happens on beat 2 of the measure. The grace note is notated by a smaller eighth note, which is attached to the larger eighth note called the principal note. The grace note's going to be played on B flat. The principal note's going to be played on A. You will see a few of these throughout the piece, so make sure that you're playing each one of them exactly the same way. Make sure that the volume focus is on the principal note, and the grace note is as close to that principal note as possible, with each one of these grace note figures being the same distance apart from the principal note. You have the same exact rhythm you have in measure 10 written at measure 12. So really 9 and 10 are repeated in 11 and 12, only on different notes. Last thing to be aware of in this section is on count 4 of measure 13, you have an eighth note followed by 4 16th notes. The eighth note falls on beat 4 of the measure, and the 4 16th notes are going to fall on 5 and 6 and. Everything else in this section is a rhythm that you have played before, so here's going to be letter A to the downbeat of letter B. Letter B is very much a recap of the first section. There is a little variance to it, so don't think that it just repeats itself completely. But again, all the rhythms that you're going to see here are rhythms that we've already covered. You should feel pretty comfortable with them. So here's going to be the third section of the piece beginning at letter B. The final section of the piece beginning at letter C, again, are all rhythms that you have seen. The biggest thing that I would be concerned about in this section is to make sure that you're connecting the rolls where you see the slurred marks as discussed at the beginning of the piece, and to make sure that you're following the dynamics. So here's the fourth and final section of the piece beginning at letter C. Overall for this piece, I would say that the biggest challenge is the flow in which you have to travel the keyboard. There are some awkward spots where you may want to experiment with different stickings. There are no stickings written in this piece, so you want to make sure you try to alternate as much as you can. You may feel more comfortable putting in a double right or a double left in certain spots of the etude. Whatever you do, I would definitely stay away from playing 3 rights or 3 lefts in a row anywhere in the etude, or just in general when it comes to keyboard playing. When practicing this piece, I also suggest you go section by section as I broke it down for you here. That way you become more comfortable with each section so that the transitions when you play the entire piece are nice and seamless. I hope this helps all of you that are preparing for your audition. Once again, as I said, if there's something that you're not sure about, something I didn't cover in the video, please make sure you leave that down in the comments below. I will definitely get back to you to help you in any way that I can. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, if you have yet to do so, please consider subscribing down below. Be on the lookout for the very first time I review a marching stick, which will be coming out shortly. And in the meantime, if you have yet to do so, go like my page at facebook.com/SwissCheeseBeats or follow me on Instagram at SwissCheeseBeats. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next time.